My family called the cops on my 5-year-old daughter while I was at work. So, I did this, family. The word typically conjures images of an unwavering sanctuary, a place of unconditional love and unwavering support. But for me, Sarah, it has always been a carefully constructed illusion, a fragile facade over a core of manipulation and passive aggression. I learned early that in my family, particularly with my mother, Evelyn, and sister Brenda, connection was currency, love a transaction to be earned through endless compliance. For years, I had painstakingly built a small, vibrant world for my daughter, Lily, a haven I believed was finally shielded from their poison. 5 years old, full of boundless imagination and laughter, Lily was my anchor, my reason for every careful step I took towards peace. Then, the phone rang, an unknown number piercing the quiet hum of my workday. "We've received a report concerning a child at your address, Ms. Davis, your daughter, Lily." Officer Reynolds' voice was calm, measured, but her words were a hammer blow directly to my chest. My world didn't just stop, it splintered. Because in that gut-wrenching moment, I knew with a hilling certainty exactly who had made that call, and why they had just declared war. But what do you do when the very people who share your blood weaponize the system against the most innocent part of you? The fluorescent hum of the office lights usually just faded into background noise for me, Sarah. Another Tuesday, another stack of financial reports to dissect. Another endless stream of emails. My life, on the surface, felt normal, stable, a carefully constructed normalcy, painstakingly built brick by brick, after years of chipping away at the foundation of what I used to call family. My peace, my quiet existence with Lily, was my sanctuary, fiercely guarded. I thought I had erected walls high enough, boundaries clear enough, to keep their toxic reach from contaminating the one pure, uncomplicated joy in my life. I was wrong. My phone, usually silenced during work, vibrated relentlessly against my desk. An unknown number. Annoyed, I almost ignored it. But something, a tiny cold prickle of unease at the back of my neck, made me answer. "Sarah Davis?" A crisp, professional voice asked. "This is Officer Reynolds from the local precinct. We've received a report concerning a child at your address, Ms. Davis. Your daughter, Lily." The world stopped. The fluorescent hum ceased to exist. The meticulous reports blurred into incomprehensible squiggles. Lily. My vibrant, imaginative, 5-year-old Lily. A report? My heart, a moment ago a steady drum, began to hammer against my ribs. A desperate bird trapped in a cage. What kind of report? Had something happened? A million terrifying scenarios flashed through my mind, each one worse than the last. But then, an even colder, more insidious dread began to creep in, chilling me from the inside out. There was only one explanation that made any sense. There was only one group of people capable of this specific, venomous cruelty. My mother, Evelyn, and my sister Brenda. They'd always been masters of manipulation, subtle gaslighters, who could twist any situation, any innocent word into a weapon. They'd used passive-aggressive comments like scalpels, carving away at my self-worth for decades. Every kind gesture from them felt like a veiled trap, every offer of help a meticulously baited hook. They thrived on chaos, on control, on watching me squirm. I'd seen it all. The emotional blackmail, the calculated silent treatments, the manufactured crises designed to pull me back into their orbit. But this, to involve the police, to target Lily? That was a new low, a descent into malice I hadn't thought even they were capable of. This wasn't a cry for attention. This was an act of pure, unadulterated sabotage. My mind raced, trying to grasp the impossible reality. How could they? Why now? Was it because I'd finally found a measure of peace without their constant interference? Was it because Lily's very existence, her unburdened joy, was a testament to a life lived free of their control? I stammered out apologies to my boss, grabbed my keys, and ran. The frantic scramble to get out of that building, down the elevator, and into my car was a blur of adrenaline and disbelief. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, knuckles white. The accusations were still unvoiced, but the implications were already tearing at me. Concern for a child from Evelyn and Brenda wasn't concern. It was a declaration of war. A war where the first casualty was my daughter's innocence. I gripped the wheel, the road ahead a tunnel of fear. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about Lily and protecting her from a family who saw her not as a beloved granddaughter, but as another pawn in their twisted game. The sickening realization solidified. They weren't just toxic, they were dangerous. The drive home was a blur of frantic anxiety and a cold rising certainty. Every mile brought me closer to whatever nightmare Evelyn and Brenda had meticulously crafted this time. You see, the calm I spoke of, the normalcy I had built for Lily and myself, it was always a fragile thing. A shimmering, iridescent bubble, constantly on the verge of popping, threatened by the unseen, insidious threads of their influence. Even when I implemented strict no contact, there were the flying monkeys, the veiled messages through distant relatives, the social media breadcrumbs hinting at their concern for me. It was a cognitive dissonance I lived with daily. The world saw loving family. I felt the chilling shadow of transactional kindness. My childhood was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. Evelyn, my mother, was a conductor of chaos, orchestrating grand performances of victimhood and subtle gaslighting that left me questioning my own sanity. Brenda, my sister, was her willing accomplice, always ready to echo Evelyn's narratives, to twist my words, to reinforce the idea that I was somehow always too sensitive, too dramatic, or ungrateful. Their love was never freely given. It was always conditional, a commodity traded for obedience, for conforming to their vision of my life. Every birthday gift came with a passive-aggressive comment. Every offer of help was laced with a hidden expectation of servitude or control. I learned to anticipate the hooks, the veiled criticisms disguised as concern, the way they would casually drop a bomb and then act utterly bewildered by my reaction, leaving me feeling like I was the insane one. Lily, my spirited, bright-eyed Lily, was my anchor, the one pure, untainted thing in my world. She was the reason I fought so hard for my peace, why I finally found the courage to step away. She was my shield, yes, but also my vulnerability. Their casual cruelty towards me I could stomach, but the thought of their poison touching her, that was unbearable. I knew they resented my independence, my choice to build a life where I was happy, where I wasn't constantly at their beck and call. They couldn't control me anymore, so they'd found a new lever, the most potent one of all. The report. My mind replayed the officer's words, dissecting them. Lily had been homesick from school today. I had a trusted neighbor, Mrs. Albright, who was supposed to check on her after her own appointment at midday. We had a clear plan. Lily was safe, resting on the couch, entertained by a movie, phone nearby. Mrs. Albright was due any moment. It must have been during that precise tiny window. Evelyn or Brenda, with their uncanny ability to appear out of nowhere, or perhaps someone they'd enlisted, saw an opportunity. They must have seen Lily through a window, perhaps playing quietly by herself in the fenced backyard for a moment of fresh air while I was on a work call inside. A moment, twisted and exaggerated, blown into a full-blown emergency. They didn't care about Lily's safety. They cared about control. They wanted to yank me back into their twisted dynamic, to prove that I couldn't survive, couldn't parent, couldn't live without their guidance. This wasn't an act of desperate concern. It was a deliberate, malevolent strike. They viewed my child, my beautiful, innocent Lily, not as a grandchild or niece to cherish, but as a tool, a transactional lever to exploit in their never-ending quest for dominance. And as I pulled onto my street, seeing the flashing blue lights of a police cruiser and a Child Protective Services vehicle, I knew the fabric of my hard-won normalcy wasn't just shredded, it had been ripped to pieces, irrevocably. The blue and white cruiser sat like an icy sentinel in my driveway, its lights muted but undeniable. Next to it, a beige sedan, unmarked save for a small, official-looking shield on the door. Child Protective Services. My breath hitched, a gasp that caught somewhere in my throat, refusing to escape. The full, gut-wrenching weight of the phone call, of my racing thoughts, slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't a mistake. This was real. As I fumbled the car into park, my gaze snapped to my front porch. There stood Officer Reynolds, her expression grave, and beside her, a woman in sensible attire, a clipboard clutched to her chest. But my eyes found Lily first. My sweet, usually fearless Lily. She stood slightly behind the CPS worker, small and pale, her wide, innocent eyes locked onto me. She was clutching her faded stuffed rabbit, Barnaby, so tightly her knuckles were white. The sight of her, so clearly frightened and utterly bewildered, ripped a hole through my chest. This was their collateral damage. I stumbled out of the car, my legs feeling like lead. "Lily!" I choked out, my voice raw. Officer Reynolds stepped forward, a hand raised. "Ms. Davis, we need to talk." The CPS worker, a Ms. Chen, nodded solemnly. "We're here regarding a report of neglect and an unsafe environment for your daughter, Lily Davis." Neglect. Unsafe environment. The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. They were so clinical, so sterile, yet they carried the full, devastating weight of my family's malice. It was as if Evelyn and Brenda had carefully chosen each accusation, each sharp, barbed word, to inflict maximum pain, to hit every fear I had ever harbored about my fitness as a mother. My mind reeled. How could they? How could they invent such vile, baseless lies? My home, the sanctuary I had built for Lily, was now under scrutiny, tainted by their fabricated narratives. They were conspicuously absent, of course, my mother Evelyn and sister Brenda. Not a shadow of them lingered, no car parked down the street, no curious glance from a neighbor's window. Yet, their presence was more palpable than if they stood right there, smirking. Their insidious malice permeated the very air, a chilling, invisible hand guiding every word spoken by these well-meaning but misled officials. This wasn't a confrontation with the police. It was a horrifying public inquisition orchestrated by my own blood. The questions came in a torrent, polite but probing, each one a fresh stab. "Can you explain why your child was unsupervised? Are there other adults present in the home? Who is responsible for childcare when you're at work?" My answers felt hollow, insufficient, even as they were truthful. How do you explain to strangers, to figures of authority, the depths of a family's pathology? How do you convey that the people who called them were not concerned citizens, but calculating saboteurs, wielding fear and systemic power as their ultimate weapons? My vision swam with a mix of furious disbelief and a profound, bone-deep sense of betrayal. The vulnerability was terrifying. Here I was, exposed, my most fundamental role as a mother questioned, stripped bare by malicious lies spun by the very people who were supposed to cherish Lily. It was an absurd, nightmarish reality, a cruel theater of the absurd where my daughter's well-being was the prop in my family's twisted drama. I felt trapped, suffocating, in a web of deceit woven by the architects of my own past pain. What truly happens to a parent, to a child, when the people you're biologically bound to are actively trying to destroy the safety you've painstakingly built? The immediate aftermath of the front porch inquisition was a blur, a disorienting haze of questions, forms, and the chilling presence of strangers scrutinizing my life. Ms. Chen, the CPS worker, was thorough, professional, almost disarmingly calm as she walked through my home, her eyes taking in every detail. Every toy on the floor, every dish in the sink, every blanket on the couch felt like an accusation, weighed against their fabricated claims of neglect and unsafe environment. I answered every question, provided every document, opened every closet. My teeth clenched against the humiliation, the sheer absurdity of having to prove my worth as a mother to people who knew nothing of the decades of insidious rot that had led to this moment. The physical exhaustion was immense, but it paled in comparison to the emotional devastation. My raw vulnerability was laid bare, not just to the authorities, but to myself. The guilt, heavy and cold, pressed on the back of my neck, a relentless weight. Had I been complacent? Had my carefully constructed peace been a delusion, leaving a door ajar for Evelyn and Brenda to exploit? I wrestled with the agonizing thought that I had somehow failed to protect Lily, that my efforts to distance us had only made her a target, made her vulnerable to the very people who were supposed to cherish her, to be her blood protectors. That insidious self-doubt, a scar from years of gaslighting, began to fester, whispering that maybe, just maybe, their lies held a sliver of truth. Lily, my bright, resilient Lily, was the most profound casualty. Her chatter, once incessant and joyful, dwindled to quiet murmurs. Her vibrant imagination, usually her solace and escape, seemed to dim. She clung to me, a silent, fearful shadow, her tiny hands clutching mine as if I might vanish. The worst part, the absolute nadir, was the nightmares. Waking up to her terrified cries, her small body trembling, reliving the faces of the officers, the questions, the unspoken threat that had invaded her safe space. Her once unshakable trust, in the world, in me, was fractured. My heart shattered anew with each sob. To see her, my precious girl, suffer because of the maliciousness of my own family, it was a pain so sharp, so unbearable, it threatened to consume me. I descended into a period of deep despair, lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying every toxic interaction, every veiled threat, every calculated slight from Evelyn and Brenda. The sheer injustice of it all, the audacity of their cruelty, gnawed at me. How could anyone, let alone family, weaponize a child? How could they stand by and watch the collateral damage of their vindictiveness without a shred of remorse? This wasn't just about winning a petty power struggle. It was about destroying a life, ripping apart the very fabric of safety I had painstakingly woven for my daughter. But then, as despair threatened to swallow me whole, something shifted. A flicker, cold, precise, and utterly fierce. The pain, once debilitating, began to transmute into a different kind of energy, a burning, righteous resolve. This wasn't just about my sanity anymore, or about my peace. This was about Lily. This was about reclaiming her innocence, her sense of safety, her laughter. I realized with a chilling clarity that merely distancing myself, maintaining no contact, was no longer enough. Their actions had crossed an unforgivable line, demonstrating that their pathological need for control would escalate indefinitely, always finding new, more damaging ways to exert their power. I started researching. Late nights, after Lily was asleep, I plunged into legal databases, online forums, anything I could find about false reporting, harassment, restraining orders in the context of family disputes. The idea of taking legal action felt monumental, terrifying even, but the alternative, living under the constant threat of their next, more devastating attack, was no longer an option. I needed an unbreachable boundary, not just emotional, but legal. A wall, concrete and unyielding, to sever these poisonous ties once and for all. This wasn't vengeance. This was an act of profound self-preservation, a desperate fight for the future of my child and my own hard-won liberation. So I did this. The phrase wasn't born from a moment of fleeting anger or a desperate need for catharsis. It was forged in the crucible of my daughter's nightmares, solidified by the awing understanding that Evelyn and Brenda's actions were not some misguided cry for help, nor a desperate plea for connection. They were a calculated act of cruelty, a precise surgical strike aimed at the most vulnerable part of my soul, Lily. The despair I felt in the days following the CPS visit began to curdle into something harder, colder, something resembling granite. I wasn't going to simply pick up the pieces anymore. I was going to ensure there were no more pieces for them to shatter. My first call was to a lawyer, not just any lawyer, but one specializing in family law and, crucially, in cases involving harassment and malicious reporting within family disputes. It felt like an admission of profound failure to have to legally formalize the severance of ties with the very people who were supposed to be my kin. But as I explained the years of gaslighting, the subtle manipulations, the way their love had always felt like a transaction, a cruel bargain. A flicker of understanding crossed my lawyer, Ms. Hayes's face. She saw it. The unseen threads of control, the psychological abuse that had escalated to weaponizing the system against an innocent child. My transformation from victim to determined protector began in earnest then, fueled by a quiet, burning resolve. This wasn't about vengeance, despite the rage that simmered beneath the surface. Vengeance was fleeting, emotional. This was about establishing an absolute, impenetrable boundary, a legal wall so formidable they could never breach it again. It was about creating a fortress around Lily and myself, built not just with physical distance, but with the unyielding strength of legal precedent. Methodically, meticulously, I began gathering evidence. Every passive-aggressive text message, every subtly threatening email, every manipulative voicemail I had ever saved suddenly became a vital piece of a much larger, darker puzzle. I compiled a timeline of their intrusions, documenting instances where they had overstepped, shown up unannounced, or tried to interfere with my life, always under the guise of concern. There were records of previous, less dramatic, but equally invasive attempts at control, calls to my workplace, veiled threats to expose secrets that didn't exist, whispers to mutual acquaintances designed to sow doubt about my character. It was a harrowing journey through the dark archives of my past, reliving moments I had tried desperately to forget. But each piece of evidence fortified my resolve. I filed a police report for harassment, detailing the false report made to CPS and presenting the evidence of their long-standing pattern of abuse. The officers, initially skeptical, began to listen more closely as I laid out the calculated maliciousness behind their actions. It was an uncomfortable, vulnerable process, recounting years of psychological warfare, but I did it for Lily. Every word I spoke was a brick in that legal wall. I also explored the options for a permanent restraining order, understanding that this would be a protracted, emotionally draining battle, an ordeal that would force me to confront Evelyn and Brenda directly in a courtroom. The thought was terrifying, but the alternative, constant fear, was infinitely worse. The mood in my small apartment shifted. The lingering despair was replaced by a quiet, steely determination. My moves now were strategic, calculated, devoid of emotion. I was no longer reacting. I was acting. And for the first time in my life, I truly felt the cold, hard power of taking my liberation into my own hands. The courtroom, a place meant for truth and justice, felt to me like another carefully constructed stage for my family's toxic drama. Only this time, the audience included a judge, legal counsel, and the grim weight of my daughter's future. The legal proceedings began, not with a bang, but with a relentless series of quiet, arduous steps. Court appearances, depositions, and the agonizing process of recalling years of emotional abuse, subtle manipulation, and overt control. Each recollection was a fresh incision, forcing me to relive the insidious ways Evelyn and Brenda had chipped away at my spirit. At my very sense of self, the emotional toll was immense, a constant dull ache behind my eyes, a knot in my stomach that never quite eased. Yet, beneath the exhaustion, that cold, fierce resolve I'd unearthed hardened further, crystalline and unyielding. This, I reminded myself, was for Lily. This was the battle for her future peace, for her inherent right to grow up unburdened by their venom. The first day I saw them in court, Evelyn and Brenda, a jolt went through me, sharp and unwelcome. They sat together, side by side, on the opposing bench, radiating an aura of injured innocence. Evelyn, my mother, wore a soft, pastel-colored suit, her face meticulously arranged in a mask of gentle concern, occasionally dabbing at her eyes with a delicate lace handkerchief. Brenda, my sister, ever her perfect echo, mirrored her mother's posture, a picture of supportive, bewildered sisterhood. It was a performance designed to disarm, to gaslight not just me, but the entire legal system itself. They were masters of this particular theater. Their testimony was a chilling masterpiece of denial and distortion. They painted a picture of themselves as worried, loving family members, driven to call authorities out of deep concern for Lily's well-being, for my supposed overwhelm. "We just felt Sarah was struggling," Evelyn crooned, her voice dripping with feigned empathy, her eyes occasionally flicking towards the judge, seeking his pity. "She's always been so independent, so stubborn. We only wanted to help. We saw poor Lily, alone, looking so neglected through the window." Brenda chimed in with vague, insubstantial anecdotes, twisting facts until they were utterly unrecognizable. "She always exaggerates, you know," Brenda would whisper under oath, a practiced, saccharine smile on her face. "So dramatic. Always making mountains out of molehills." It was the same old script they'd used on me for decades, the same tired lines, but played out on a public stage where the consequences were terrifyingly real. They attempted, with chilling precision, to discredit my character, my parenting, my very sanity, portraying me as an ungrateful, unstable individual who had cruelly cut off her devoted family. Their words laid bare, for all to see, the full extent of their transactional view of relationships. Family was a resource to be exploited, love a tool for control, and concern a convenient mask for pure, unadulterated malice. But I faced their lies with a stoic resolve that surprised even me. Ms. Hayes, my lawyer, was a steady, formidable anchor, guiding me through the labyrinthine process. We presented the irrefutable evidence I had so meticulously gathered. Phone records detailing Evelyn's relentless attempts to contact me, despite my clear no-contact directive, past police reports of minor harassment, incidents I had previously dismissed as isolated, yet now, in retrospect, clicked into place as part of a larger, terrifying pattern. We had screenshots of Brenda's passive-aggressive social media posts, subtle jabs designed to undermine my reputation. There was even a damning text message from Evelyn, sent months ago, in a fit of pique when I refused a particularly outrageous demand, that chillingly stated, "You'll regret cutting us off. You'll see what happens when you try to do it all alone." It wasn't a direct threat on its own, but in the context of their history and the recent events, it spoke volumes of premeditated malice. We brought in Dr. Eleanor Vance, a respected child psychologist specializing in parental alienation and malicious reporting. Her expert testimony on the devastating impact of false accusations on a child's development, and her clinical assessment of the typical dynamics present in such family systems mirrored my lived experience so precisely, it was almost eerie. Her detached professional validation of the abuse I had endured, and the calculated nature of their actions, validated everything I had felt, everything I had known instinctively, but had been gaslighted into doubting for so long. Each day in court was a profound draining of my spirit, an emotional marathon. Reliving the trauma, facing their unrepentant faces, listening to their carefully crafted lies, it threatened to break me. There were moments of sheer exhaustion, moments where the weight of it all pressed down so hard I could barely breathe. But then I would think of Lily, her frightened eyes, her whispered nightmares, and an unexpected strength would surge through me, cold and pure. This wasn't just my fight for liberation, it was Lily's fight for peace. My resolve wasn't fueled by anger, but by a mother's fierce, unyielding need to protect her child. This wasn't about winning for me, it was about winning for her. It was about creating a definitive, legal barrier, a line they could never cross again. This was the moment I stopped hoping for their change and started building my own, unshakable future. This was where I reclaimed my sanity, not just for myself, but for the peaceful, secure future Lily deserved. The courtroom air, usually thick with tension, held an almost unbearable silence. It was the kind of quiet that pressed in on you, where every breath felt magnified, every heartbeat a drum solo in your own ears. All the relentless work, the painful recounting of history, the stoic endurance of Evelyn and Brenda's gaslighting, it had all culminated in this single moment. Ms. Hayes gave my hand a brief, reassuring squeeze beneath the table. Evelyn and Brenda sat rigidly on the opposite side, their faces unreadable, though I could feel their collective glare like a physical burn. Then the judge entered, and the entire room rose. This court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Sarah Davis. The words, delivered with a calm finality, hit me with an impact I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't an explosion of joy, not a triumphant shout, but a profound, almost disbelieving release. It was as if a physical weight, one I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for decades, suddenly lifted from my shoulders. The verdict came swiftly after. The court was issuing a permanent restraining order against Evelyn Davis and Brenda Shaw. They were prohibited from contacting me or Lily, directly or indirectly, through any means, or from approaching our residence, school, or workplaces. Furthermore, the judge found their actions constituted malicious reporting and harassment, imposing a substantial fine to be paid to me, as well as ordering them to cover my legal costs. It was a clear, unequivocal repudiation of their fabricated claims, a judicial declaration that their concern was, in fact, cruelty. Across the aisle, Evelyn's perfectly composed facade crumbled. Her mouth fell open slightly, her eyes widening in a mixture of outrage and disbelief. Brenda, beside her, gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Their faces, usually so adept at feigning innocence, now contorted into expressions of pure, unadulterated shock and fury. They looked utterly bewildered, as if the universe had somehow misinterpreted their benevolent intentions. They couldn't fathom that their transactional tactics, their manipulative control, had finally met a wall that would not yield. For me, it was more than just a legal victory. It was the official, legal severance of ties. The final cutting of the cord, the burden of fear, the constant vigilance I had lived with for so long, simply lifted. The gnawing anxiety that they would find another way to creep into my life, to poison Lily's world, dissipated with the judge's every word. It wasn't a triumphant, celebratory moment, but a quiet, profound one of resolution. A deep, bone-weary sense of relief washed over me, a dawning awareness of personal liberation that was so vast, it felt almost dizzying. I thought of Lily. In the weeks leading up to the verdict, I'd noticed subtle shifts. Her nightmares had lessened in frequency, though not entirely vanished. She was still a little more hesitant, a little quieter than before, but there was a burgeoning lightness in her steps, a faint return of her bright-eyed curiosity. Now I knew, with this legal certainty, that she would visibly relax further. She would sense her mother's renewed peace, absorb it like sunlight, and begin to truly heal in a space completely free of their looming shadow. This verdict deconstructed the very concept of family as Evelyn and Brenda had always presented it. It wasn't love, it was control. It wasn't care, it was coercion. It wasn't support. It was a transaction. And now, the transaction was officially closed, decisively and permanently. They had wanted to hurt me, to prove their power, but in doing so, they had inadvertently handed me the very key to my and Lily's absolute freedom. The future stretched out, unburdened, a wide-open vista I could finally walk into without glancing over my shoulder. The fight was over, and the true work of building a new, genuine life could finally begin. The final gavel had fallen, a sharp, decisive sound that echoed not just through the courtroom, but through the very chambers of my soul. With the legal battle firmly behind us, Lily and I finally began to breathe. It wasn't an immediate, miraculous erasure of the past, but a slow, profound unfurling, like a tightly wound spring finally released. The absence of Evelyn and Brenda's shadow was palpable, a lightness I hadn't realized how desperately I craved. The constant hum of anxiety that had been my baseline for years, the subtle unease that something was always off, finally faded. This was the profound peace that absolute estrangement gifted me, a quiet, sacred space where their malice could no longer touch us. Lily, my brave little girl, was the truest barometer of our healing. In the months that followed, I watched her carefully, tenderly, as she rediscovered her laughter, her boundless energy. The nightmares, once a nightly terror, dwindled to distant whispers, then vanished entirely. Her imagination, once muted by fear, blossomed again. She would spend hours building elaborate fortresses with her blankets and pillows, her joyous chatter filling the house. It was more than just a return to her old self. It was a flourishing, unburdened by the invisible weight she had unknowingly carried. We spent our evenings reading stories, snuggled close, or just sitting in comfortable silence, her small hand nestled in mine, moments that were once tinged with an underlying anxiety, now pure, unadulterated joy. I reflected often on the journey that had brought us here. The initial disbelief that my own mother and sister could resort to such depravity, the agonizing pain of seeing my child's trust fractured, the desperate fight to prove my worth as a mother to strangers. It had been a crucible, a trial by fire that nearly consumed me. But from that fire, something stronger had emerged. I had shed the last vestiges of that insidious self-doubt, the internalized gaslighting that had convinced me for so long that I was somehow at fault, that their love was worth the price of my soul. The verdict had not only given me legal protection, it had given me incontrovertible proof that I was right, that they were wrong, and that their family was indeed a transaction, not a bond. We began building a true, supportive, chosen family. Friends, colleagues, even Lily's teachers, who had witnessed my quiet struggle and offered unwavering support, stepped forward in ways my blood relatives never had. Dinners with friends became celebrations of connection, filled with genuine laughter and authentic conversations. Weekends were for adventures, picnics in the park, visits to the science museum, moments unmarred by the looming threat of unexpected visits or manipulative phone calls. I found incredible strength in these new relationships, built on mutual respect, empathy, and unconditional love. It was a stark contrast to the hollow, conditional love I had known, revealing to me that family isn't defined by shared DNA, but by shared values and genuine care. My self-worth, once so fragile and easily manipulated by Evelyn and Brenda, solidified into something robust and unshakable. I learned that my liberation wasn't just about escaping their control, but about embracing my authentic self, unapologetically. I had found the profound strength required to protect not just my child, but my very essence, from those who sought to diminish it. This entire ordeal, as agonizing as it had been, had served as the ultimate catalyst for my freedom. It had forced me to confront the deepest, most uncomfortable truths about my past, and to make the radical choice to sever ties, not out of malice, but out of a fierce, desperate need for peace and self-preservation. Life now is a testament to the power of boundaries and resilience. Lily sleeps soundly through the night, dreams filled with princesses and space adventures, not shadowed figures. I wake each morning with a quiet, determined resolve, ready to embrace a day where our safety, our joy, and our futures are solely ours to shape. This is our new horizon, forged in the fires of adversity, built brick by brick with courage and unwavering love. It's a testament that sometimes the most profound act of love for yourself and your children is to walk away, to affirm your worth, and to understand that true family is built on love and respect, not obligation or the arbitrary ties of blood. And in that quiet, hard-won peace, we thrive. And so, our journey with Sarah concludes, a testament to the fact that blood alone does not define family. Her story, raw and unflinching, shows us the devastating cost of toxic ties, but also the profound, liberating power of setting unshakable boundaries. It's a reminder that sometimes the greatest act of self-love and protection for your children means walking away, even from those who share your DNA, to forge a new horizon built on genuine love and respect. What did you take away from Sarah's courage? Have you experienced the complex pain of disentangling from familial toxicity? Share your thoughts respectfully below. Thank you for watching Luna Stories. If this story resonated with you, or if you believe in the power of personal liberation, don't forget to subscribe to Luna Stories and hit the notification bell so you won't miss another journey of resilience and rediscovery.